Hi, everybody. Just a quick announcement before we get started today. If you're a Canadian financial advisor or planner who's fed up with their technology platform or just looking to make improvements in their tech platform, I got the event for you. One of my associations, the Financial Planning Association of Canada, is sponsoring the very first Canadian Advisor Tech Expo. It is a 3-day event where you'll be able to see and hear from various vendors and various verticals as to what they have to offer people in this space. So if you're interested in checking it out, please visit the website at www.advisortechexpo.ca. And now on to today's show. Hello and welcome to FinTech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today on the show, I have cybersecurity expert Evgeniy Kharam to talk about general concerns around cybersecurity and best practices, both for end users and for the companies supplying these services in the first place. And with that, here's my interview with Evgeniy. Evgeniy, thanks for taking the time.
Jason, happy to be here. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, well, we typically have conversations once a month anyway, so we just decided to record one. So Evgeniy Kharam, tell us a little bit about what it is you do.
Great, thank you. So first of all, I work full-time in a company called Herjavec Group. We've been around almost 20 years. Some may know Robert Herjavec from a show called Shark Tank in US, and previously Dragon Den in Canada as well. So we are a cybersecurity company that focus on cybersecurity only, and we help enterprises on a variety of topics. I lead architecture in the company. I've been doing this role for the last 6-7 years. Before this, I used to run around installing firewalls and a variety of different network technologies, and also running multiple teams in professional services. I've been in Canada for almost 15 years. I'm going to be in a week 15 years. And before I came to Canada, I used to live in Israel, where I work at a company called Checkpoint, and also spent a number of years in the Navy, where I started my IT and cybersecurity career.
So you've been involved in this for a very long time is what it comes down to.
Depend on how many dog years you're counting, because it's 15, 20 years. But because I am working on this all the time, so it's quite a lot of time.
Yep, that's for sure. And so you've seen a lot, and we discussed a lot of what you've seen. So it's been interesting. So you tell us what it is you do, and you give us your history. I brought you on the show because security is almost always the first thing that people mention when talking about potentially looking at a new software vendor or whatever it might be. And rightly so. But I also think a lot of times it comes from a position of ignorance in that it's not ignorant. Oh, sorry. Let me say that differently. Not so much ignorance as fear, right? This looks good, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of change and different things. And security is kind of this thing they throw out there. And most people don't even know how to detect the right answer. So let's talk about where the threats are first and what we're seeing. And then we can talk about best practices. And of course, the biggest thing in the news in the last couple of years has been specifically ransomware attacks. We've seen a number of large ones, including on the U.S. Was it natural gas pipeline, or was it the gas pipeline? One or the other. The bottom line is it was substantial, as well as countless hospitals throughout the world. Talk to me about how these attacks work and practices around preventing yourself from becoming victim to it.
So, as a simple, when we say ransomware, is basically somebody was able to get access to your environment. Your environment could be your PC. Your environment could be your servers. Your environment to be IoT devices or your gas tanks in the case. In case of them, it was actually access to their accounting system. So they could not do any accounting and billing, and therefore couldn't do business. In many other cases, if let's say you're a dentist shop and somebody was able to take your extra systems that run on Windows hostage, you're not able to do your job as well. Mm-hmm. But the idea here, we used to call them viruses. Now we call them malware, and there's many, many different names. But I take something that belong to you and you use every day, I encrypt it, and you no longer have access. You work in financial. So what will happen, I hope it will never happen, if all your files that are related to your customer will be encrypted, you're not able to do your day-by-day job. So your day-by-day job will be impacted. Interestingly enough, in the past, people did ransomware on private people as well. So let's say you're a gamer and you play World of Warcraft every time, and you spend a lot of money on the game. What if I go and encrypt your save file with all the information about your character, about how you log in? Then you're not able to have access, and you're not able to play your game. But the bad guys quickly realize that this is a very small potato, and it's much bigger fish to fry with enterprises and small, medium businesses. Now, small, medium businesses usually don't spend a lot of time and money on security because they think, okay, I'm a very small, nobody will care about me, but they all still rely on computers. They all still rely on connected infrastructure. We don't manually run finance. We don't manually run cases. We all do it on the computer. So if I'm even coming to a garage to service my car, and the garage using the computer system to order parts, and this system is unavailable, then I cannot serve my car. There are certain simple things that can be done. Of course, there's a big list of what else can be done. But on a small scale, you want to have an antivirus, or what we call EDR, endpoint detection and response, or EPP, endpoint protection, on your laptop, on all your devices. At least if or when somebody will get in, they will not have such an easy time to infect your system. Now, this is a proactive control. There is also another proactive control that you can do is, of course, to have backup. The same as we have, at least I hope so, many of us have backups of our pictures that we care about, and we put them on a different device somewhere else because we don't want to lose them. You want to have a periodic backup of the files you've been working with. And ideally, this will be somewhere not on your laptop or not on your servers. This way, if such problem will happen to you, you're able to restore information. So this is the basic controls.
I mean, in fairness, that's worked in the past. I think one of the big consulting firms was recently targeted for a big one. I can't remember who it was.
Accenture?
Yeah, it was Accenture. Yeah, and there was an announcement that they had been attacked where they basically said we were able to restore from backups and there was no leakage of client information. And anyway, so which, man, if that had actually stuck, wow, I can't imagine the hit to their business and them coming away from it unscathed the way they did. Talk about a vote of confidence in their services. So
yes, I agree. We can. There's also a bad example with Garmin. I believe last year, Garmin had backups, but they couldn't confirm the backups had no issues as well. So they end up paying the ransomware to get the systems and the files back because they were just afraid that even the backups will not have all the bad guys' information in Active Directory. And in this case, Active Directory is a system that's in charge of managing majority of the people users. This is one part. We always have like a different scales of cybersecurity controls and protection. It's the same idea I always say, if you come to an island and you need to live there by yourself, then you probably will build a fence. You will make sure you have a fire, you have a shelter, and later on you create a plan on what else that you do. Same with cybersecurity. There's minimal things you want to do, and then you want to build a cybersecurity program of many other things. And of course, you want to create procedures. So let's say you live on an island and you build a fence and you know you have a gate. If you have a gate, but you don't have a procedure to close the gate before you go into sleep, then the animals will get in. So you want security controls to protect you, but you also want procedures on how to operate the security controls. If you run a small business and this business is acceptable to the public and people walking in back and forth, but you never lock your screen, then what's the point? Because if I can now access to your laptop when you want to a washroom or for a lunch break, even you have the security control and ability to lock your screen, but you don't do this, then there's no point. Because it's a combination between procedures and security controls.
So, I mean, the backup piece is so vital. It's amazing to think, and people have a hard time wrapping their heads around this unless they've watched Mr. Robot or followed the various attacks that have been in the media. But they're not taking your data. They just found a way to make it impossible for you to touch it.
So it's an interesting part, because in some cases, what they do is they do kind of double impact.
Potentially, yeah.
Yes, they may take your data because they know you have backups. And they say, if you don't pay the money, then we will make this data exposed to everyone.
Yeah.
In some cases, they may not care, but in some cases, they may care.
And it's, and frankly, people will always rant about, where's the law enforcement on this? But the reality is most of these attacks tend to come from overseas in jurisdictions that don't really care. I'm told there's even Russian hacker magazines where they basically post like the best hacks that they've had publicly. And
why you always blame the Russians? Come on, Jason. Always the Russians.
Because they're good at it. No. What can I say?
There's
hackers everywhere.
There's quite a lot of stories about Russian, Chinese, doesn't matter right now who they are, about companies that have their own HR, their own benefits plan, vacation, the whole 9 yards, even support lines. There's a lot of information.
Support lines for hacker organizations?
So yes, it happened. And there were stories about people. So let's say you get ransomware. And now the company asks you to forward them like a Bitcoin or percentage of the Bitcoin, and you don't know how to do it. They offer a support line to help you to actually transfer the funds, the money to you, is to them, to make sure you get them. There's they're quite sophisticated. They will do everything they need to make sure they can get the money. And there was also stories about people who get ransomware. And then there was email, oh, sorry, we didn't intend to do it. There was somebody else. It was a mistake. Here's the files, how to decrypt it. Or there were stories about people negotiating with the ransomware people about, oh, we cannot pay you so much, but we can pay you this amount. Those are quite a lot of different stories. Right now, with the enterprises, majority of them will have cyber insurance. Yes. And the moment something like this will happen, you will activate your cyber insurance. Somebody for the company will come. They will actually call what we call instant response, people that will work and negotiate and understand what's happened. There's also quite a lot of rules and regulations. When do you need to disclose what happened to you, depending on where you live? Mm-hmm. It becomes problematic as well.
Absolutely. Well, let's. One thing I want to address here always, because oftentimes people talk. There are definitely attacks that are based off of like just hacking through code, absolutely. But the most common, correct me if I'm wrong, the most common form of getting into people's systems without authorization is human engineering. Is that not the case? Mm-hmm. So, as I always like to say, like the weakest link TV show, stop. It's not your vendors that are the weakest link. It's typically your people, and this is why training is so important.
You've bring in a very interesting point, because the month of October in cybersecurity is the security awareness month. So if you're on LinkedIn, you will see a lot of information about people, about passwords, about two-factor authentication that I think is very, very important. What do you do? How do you connect? For example, as a simple thing, you never want to use the same passwords for your Facebook and your bank account.
Yep.
And with your bank account, it doesn't actually take a long time to create two-factor authentication. And you may say, but Evgeniy, it's annoying. Every time I connect to my bank, it asks me for a second authentication. But it's not, because the majority of the system are smart enough to, for example, remember your browser. So for people to actually get into your bank account, they need to hack your laptop first. Versus me getting to password somehow and connect from a different location, it may be much easier. Because there is small steps that you can do to provide and secure yourself. And you brought a very good example about law enforcement. I think we all know that we need to lock our doors before we go to sleep in a house. I think we need to lock our car, because if you don't lock your car or leave your windows open, it gets stolen. I don't think the insurance company will pay you. They blame back on you. We know we need to close our windows. So we do certain things in our house because we get used to it. We're still not there to understand the same apply to cybersecurity. There are certain things you need to do to make sure you do the basic stuff, like the password management, like the two-factor authentication, like not to write your passwords on a sticky note. You can use password management. And if you cannot use password management, you can write them in a small book and lock the book somewhere else. Not just leave it open on a table. There are small things that can be done.
It's funny you say that, the sticky note, because the first thing when I get, I'm speaking at conferences and people like inevitably bring up like, what about security? It's like, oh, let me ask you an honest question. Is any of your passwords written on sticky notes for any of your websites around your desk somewhere? And then inevitably the room starts laughing. I'm like, don't deny it. I know you all do it. Right. Like that's the reality of it. And it goes back to, again, human engineering. We're using passwords. We're using simple passwords. And it's never been easier. I mean, bloody heck, iPhone, like Apple embeds it into their software at this point. Google has a password keeper between Chrome. It's the standalone ones like LastPass, who else? LastPass, 1Password, and Dashlane. Like awesome, world-class like products. And even then, so for those who aren't familiar with that, you're able to have different, unique, complex passwords for every website. So if one thing gets hacked, only the one thing gets hacked, not everything else. And if you with that one, all you got to do is have one complex password you remember and do two-factor authentication. And you are in the top decile of security as a user compared to the average person where, password 123 is still the number one most used password, right? Like, you find a PIN card on the floor, you can put that into a bank machine and type 1234, and there's a pretty good chance you're going to get in.
Could be. Now, this is related to individuals.
Correct.
We also speak quite a lot about which emails to click. So simple example, if you get an email about password reset from Apple, for example, don't ever click on the link in the email. If you think it actually happened, just go to Apple, connect normally, don't click on the link. It's a very simple thing to do. If you really think somebody hacked you. We're not talking about how I understand the link, maybe the link came from Apple, but just don't click on such links. You can go to Apple Direct.
Exactly.
Because unfortunately, we get SMS, text messages, and emails about your account get hacked. You really need to connect here. And it's not always came from the reliable source. But I want to switch topics a bit and talk about small, medium businesses, about what they do.
Well, we were going there, so let's go on to that. But small, medium-sized businesses who are users of technology, talk to me about best practices for how they can protect themselves.
So we spoke about passwords, apply to them. We spoke about, we actually didn't talk about firewalls and simple security solutions and wireless in the businesses. So if you have a Wi-Fi in your business, you don't also want it to be publicly open. You want to have a password. And if you have guests, don't allow them on the same network as your system. Create a guest network that don't have connectivity to your system, because you don't want them to wandering around your laptops and trying to figure out what they can poke around there. There's a simple thing you can do. And even with the majority of the shelf, Bell, Rogers, or other providers, routers, you can separate systems and create a bit more complicated passwords for the Wi-Fi. You want to make sure your laptops are locking down the screen, maybe after 10 minutes, maybe after 5 minutes. This way, nobody can have access. But it's a good practice when you leave your desk, just lock your laptop if people come to your office. The part I want to also touch base is if you, as part of SMB, have your own software, so you create your own application, your own website, you also want to validate the security part there, because now you provide access to other people. And the people that connect to you, you now need to collect information for their connection. So if you create your own software, you also want to have an MFA for the users. Or in majority of the cases, if you can pass the authentication to LinkedIn, to Google, or maybe even to Facebook, then people can utilize this way to connect to you, and you're not going to be saving their credentials. If you do save the credentials, of course, we don't save the credentials. We need to encrypt them as well. And the interesting part about creating your own applications and your own website, there's a lot of API connectivity. So before you publish, before you go and do more with your application, you want to do a web application assessment. There's a variety of tools on the market. Some of them called DAST, Dynamic Access Control, that will basically validate what can be done with your website, what can be done with the APIs on your website, how far people can do, because during the creation, during the design, unfortunately, not all the time we can be accountable and make sure we check everything. In many cases, we call it pen testing as well, is when people come in and try to hack the systems. And DAS connectivity and DAS check is part of it. So API security become an integrated part of any creation of applications you have right now. And after that, it's basically how big is your SMB? Because if you're a SaaS provider right now and you're growing and you start working with other businesses, then companies may start asking you about your security development. What do you actually do to security development? Which open libraries you are using in your code, or maybe somebody else doing it for you? It's quite a big topic. We actually, as part of the podcast, covering this right now. I forgot to mention that besides working in the Herjavec group,
tell us about your podcast as well. We'll go by all means.
So me and my partner for crime, Dimitri, we started a podcast almost 18 months ago around security architecture. And the reason we started the podcast is because we realized how many companies buying solutions and not finishing the implementation of the solutions. They're basically complaining to the vendors that, oh, your solution doesn't work. It doesn't work well. But in many cases, just didn't finish the integration. I call it shelfer. My partner for crime, Dimitri, call it security theater, when I just buy solutions, but it doesn't actually do what's supposed to be done.
But it makes sense, right? Like if you got to start a technology company, provide a solution, it's because you see a gap you see something you want to build. And how many people truly in this area really specialize in security? And how many of those people get hired for startups? Like, unfortunately, security is a necessity, but it's like eating your vegetables. No one wants to eat the vegetables, but they're on the plate and they got to be there and it has to be just right. But like, you're not going to get a top expert in cybersecurity on your initial starting team in order to make sure that you're solid from day one in most cases. So it's not surprising.
Pretty much no. And unfortunately, people try to duct tape the security when they're almost done the development of the solution. So what we're doing as part of the podcast, we are talking to many different vendors and asking them questions about integration that we think helping, and we actually get quite a lot of responses that we do help to choose a correct solution. So we did 2 seasons about working from home, about how to connect securely back to the office. Right now, we're actually doing a season about application security. So I mentioned DAST, Dynamic Application Security Testing. how to do secure coding, how to utilize the tools you need to create secure applications. That's quite a variety of tools there as well. But it's important because later on, when you create your solution, you start working with other companies, and companies who wouldn't want to buy your solution, if you cannot prove to them it's secure, then you may end up in not a very good space. We all know what happened with SolarWinds last year and how people blame them, and nobody wants to be in the same boat.
I mean, and that's the thing is security is a confidence game, right? Like at the end of the day, I mean, if you have a massive security breach, the amount of egg on your face as a large enterprise going forward is enormous. And everybody, I don't think anyone really buys the game that you learn your lesson. Look at the Equifax hack. How callous a hack was that? Outward facing a server that the password was admin and the username was admin. Like, how does that even happen? And at this point, they're the butt of security jokes.
So this is not supposed to be happened. But you know what we see even more? We see even more people working on a problem, they're troubleshooting a problem and say, I'm going to create a temporary rule to allow me to connect from XYZ. And when I'm done, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to remove it.
But they never
they finish. They work the entire night and then they trash and they go to sleep and they just forget to remove the rule or remove this access. And then this happened. I need access to the server temporarily. Okay, here's admin for you. When you're done, let me know and I'll remove it, because they're under pressure to solve a particular problem. And then we end with such problems. Pretty much whatever happened in the internet for the last couple of years, everybody will say, if you guys only did this, you will never have this problem. But it's a kind of a two-sided sword, because they say, but I had no people working on this. My IT security team is very small. There was no budget to buy XYZ. Right now, there's much more awareness. We see 10, 15, 20% of the budget of companies going towards cybersecurity because it's just important.
Well, you have to, because frankly, if it's not going there, if you're not protecting yourself from the threats that are out there, then you're potentially going to lose your entire business if you're not careful. So we've talked about that. The reality is, I think if anything, what you said, all these different areas and being aware. I mean, isn't the solution really just being aware that this is something that has to, from day one, be something that is a focus of how you're going to handle your business? Like, it can't be an afterthought.
100% is the same that if you going to go in the dark during the winter, you're thinking about, okay, I need a flashlight. I need to keep my eyes open because there's maybe bad people and potentially slippery because it's ice for the places where there's ice in during the winter. You're aware. You're thinking about what you're going to do. So you step more carefully. You look around. Same here. You don't click on any links you see. You're asking twice, what is this information just came to me? Or what is this file that just came to me? And when you open your eyes and you think before, analyze, and then click or do something, you probably will eliminate majority of the problems.
I mean, you don't have to get to like my level where I basically open up these things in isolated areas with protection and then verify the URLs if they're actually legitimate or not. And you don't have to get to that level. There was a couple of years ago, there was a very successful phishing scam utilizing Apple as a proxy that I know of several people who basically fell for it. And they get to the third page of their password reset sequence on this thing, and suddenly they start asking for social insurance numbers and social security numbers. And it's just like, multiple people like, why does Apple need this? I'm like, oh my God, you just gave away your, close it down. Whatever you did, it's gone. Like, just go back and manually reset your iCloud password for real. But you fell prey to this. It's very easy to make an email look like it comes from another company.
This is why I say, if you have a password reset and you want to do password reset, don't do this if somebody came over the email. Just go to Apple, go to iCloud. Yeah. And we didn't talk about SMB and email security. It's a very good practice to add an email security provider to your email that will scan the URLs, that will scan the files comes to you. It's not as expensive as you may think it is.
But it's also not perfect, right? So, there is no, I think part of the lesson in this conversation, there is no full delegation of your diligence. Like, you have to take responsibility for basically being your first line of protection, or maybe not the first line of protection, all the other levels of diligence and other technology we put in place to prevent that sort of stuff is there. But at the end of the day, you're the last line of defense. And if you're not smart about it, you'll fall prey to some very simple scams.
I agree 100%.
So before we wrap up, there's 3 questions I ask everybody to end on a positive note and get you thinking. First one is, if you had one wish for something you could change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
One thing is people always rushing after a brand new gadget, a brand new technology, and don't want to spend time to finish the integration of what they already have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's no one, let's put it this way. When you look at a marketing website, the first thing as a sales pitch is not security. It's never security. Here's our utility. Our utility is security, right? Like it is, you better hit this checkbox. And unfortunately, I think we all assume that it's implied in so many cases.
Agree.
Yeah. Second question. This one's going to modify a little bit for you because normally it's about the company as a whole, but because we're talking about general industry, what is the biggest challenge facing cybersecurity professionals today and consumers when it comes to the online world?
It's definitely the amount of information we have, and we just don't have enough time to be aware about everything. There is so much going on daily that one person, just impossible for one person to know everything. So we have to rely on other people, and you always understand that you just not going to know everything. It's just impossible because there are so many things going on.
I hear you. It's funny. I feel like a lot of people seem to have less tolerance for cybersecurity violations than they do others. At the end of the day, there's no system or place in this world that mankind cannot crack into with enough motivation. I think it was General Patton who said something to the effect of mankind has conquered mountains and the entire earth. Security is fortified defenses. Who are we kidding, right? Like we're not going to succumb to that. So the reality is I often see people get their knickers in a knot about cybersecurity, but oftentimes it might just be easier to break into their actual physical offices. So security is a mindset altogether that should be applied everywhere. And it's something that you need to be aware of as many possible challenges as it can come after you. But it's really best effort. But it's got to be a really good best effort.
But you also need to take into account that you may be hacked, and you need to prepare that what you will do if this happened. We talk about backups, reputation. How do I recover? What do I do? How do I communicate with people in case my systems are down?
That's it. It's sometimes it's not even a hack. Sometimes it's your own doing. I mean, we just had the Facebook fiasco, them going down. Yep. That was hilarious. And it was because, frankly, the message there was they hadn't thought about redundancy enough because they pushed down a change that cut them off, that not only shut down the website, but cut them off for all their own internal tools because their internal tools were in the same architecture. Right. And the only way they could actually even get close to fixing the thing was to physically go and plug into the servers and reset things. But even then, key cards weren't working right because it had been so long. So redundancy, which is in this case, backups like we're talking about, even the biggest companies will fall prey to some of these things. And if you don't think about disaster recovery the right way, imagine any business losing its entire, especially a services business, losing its entire database of information. Good luck to you rebuilding that.
And it's interesting because there are certain protocols like DNS, for example, is such a, the name resolution, it's such a global and massive protocol that there was issues in the past. But yesterday, it was 2 days ago when the Facebook actually happened, was a very good example of how DNS may impact the entire company.
Yeah, there's entire companies basically that their only value proposition is preventing DDoS attacks, like distributed, just making sure that your domain stays up, and if someone tries to attack it, people will still be able to get to your website. So it's not a small thing. And then the last question I have for you is, what excites you the most about what it is you're working on and keeps you getting up in the morning every day to keep on fighting the good fight?
I answer the second question is about the amount of information, but what actually excites me is about how much we can learn, how much new things I can learn about how things are actually working, about the integrations that can be done, about the innovations that can change the way we operate. What maybe 5 years ago will take us an hour to do right now with certain innovation we can do in 2-5 minutes. So I really like technology in a way that technology will help people. So it's exciting me to learn about new approach to technology, new invention. Like just look on the electric vehicles, what happened in the last 10 years. We've been talking about this for 25 years and now it's happening. So it's very exciting to me how it's going to operate and what can be done with it. Drones. Now I can do photography with drones or control stuff remotely. So all this innovation, this what excites me a lot.
Yeah. And in fairness, you're in a facet of the technology market that touches all of it. Doesn't matter what innovation we're talking about, security plays a role in all of it. So I'm sure you get to see and learn about all kinds of interesting acts that no one even contemplated because the technology didn't exist 10 years ago.
I was just literally speaking with somebody yesterday what they do security on firmware of hardware. So they validate the chipset of a laptop or network device not being alternated in one way or another. I don't think anybody will think about it 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was that was it the false report about the Chinese government inserting chips into certain boards of a certain company a while back? Turned out to no one could find any hard evidence of the thing, but that was a frightening thought. And unless you have a company doing that level of just the most basic architectural form of security checking, you're building off. That's incredibly dangerous to build off a foundation that doesn't have that kind of security.
Yeah, and just let's think about how much we can now do with machine learning. It's not, of course, it's not a remedy for everything, but it allows us to do a lot of stuff. I'm personally waiting for somebody to create a machine learning algorithm that will remove the ums and rs in the podcast recording. So that when I record the podcast, I want somebody to go and remove all the ums, and you like from the recording part. I think it can be done if I can show, okay, this is the part that I wanted to remove. I don't want to do it manually.
Yeah, well, there's vendors I've seen do that already, apparently, in the first crack. So yes, so Evgeniy, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it. Every now and then I like to have a discussion about some of these fundamental issues because frankly, like it's nice to talk about the wonderful things that are happening out there, but if we don't make sure our data stays safe, we pay a bigger price for being online than not in some cases. So
sometimes the speed is also the innovation. Like in your financial industry, we mentioned APIs. The speed is making everything much faster and better. So thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. And that was today's episode of FinTech Impact. I hope you enjoyed that. And as always with this stuff, stay diligent. I said earlier, and I fed them, the reality is people are usually the biggest problem. Technology is the second biggest problem, but people are a massive, bigger problem than tech is. So as always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Spotify, or whatever it is you get your podcasts. And until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.